Mr. Robinson, your methods of handling the situation caused a disaster. Do you realize that your actions have resulted in a whole chain of tremendous losses for the whole company? Michael Stewart accused Jeffrey Robinson, having lost his patience after several hours of arguing without reaching any conclusion. Mr. Stewart, with all due respect, I'm not having any of this anymore. We've been going like this for hours, and we're not getting anywhere. I will retreat in my office, and will rule on this matter in the following days. However, Mr. Robinson, I'm warning you. I don't believe I can offer yet another second chance. This board meeting is over. Michael interrupted Jeffrey, grabbed his suitcase from the table and rushed out of the meeting room. Everyone let go a sigh of relief, slowly got up from their seats and left the room in an orderly manner, without seeming to give Michael Stewart's outburst of anger too much attention. The only person who seemed concerned was Jeffrey himself, who spent a few moments in shock, staring into the abyss, then suddenly got up from the table, walked towards the first door he could see, slammed it behind him and left. A few minutes later, I was already back in my office, sitting behind my desk and reflecting on what Jeffrey's failure meant to me. Everyone in the company knew that Michael Stewart, the CEO, was quick to anger, and was quite reputable for not needing a lot of reasons to fire someone. His reaction clearly pointed at Jeffrey's days as a member of the board of directors were numbered. His department was rather small when it came to the number of employees, but crucial nonetheless. I immediately started seeing his potential departure from the company as an opportunity, since I always thought I was more qualified to lead his department, and was always disappointed that I had the least important and subsequently least funded department under my command. The idea of taking over his responsibilities while also keeping mine instantly came up in my mind. Even trading my position for his would have landed me a significant increase in authority, and that department was given a lot of importance in the company. It seemed that the best way to consolidate my position within the company's leadership and make more money at the same time. However, Jeffrey was one of the few people in the company that I would get along with well. I did not want to cause Jeffrey more suffering than he was already dealing with, although the temptation of using his low point to take the position was growing by every second. After spending a few more moments contemplating the issue, it became clear that I still lacked objective information, and that all I was doing was daydreaming. I decided to leave my grandiose plans for later and went out of my office to check the progress of my subordinates on the latest project. Took a few steps on the long corridor and noticed a familiar silhouette in the distance. I rushed to the other end of the hallway as soon as I realized that the familiar person was Jeffrey himself. Jeff, I'm sure there's a solution to this problem. You can still prove him wrong, I spoke, attempting to sound as sincere as I could as soon as I was sure that he could hear me. This is the third time he's done this to me, Eric. I'm not going to be able to convince him to give me another chance this time. Michael is going to throw me out of the company like I'm a rat. Look, there has to be a way to make Michael change his mind. We've done it before. Really, Eric? You have always backed Michael's decisions. The best thing you could do now is stop adding insult to injury and just leave me be. That's what you think about me. If there is anyone who wants Michael to step down from his position, that's me, I said, speaking louder than before, although the hallway was full of company employees moving from one office to another. What did they do to you, Eric? For the past 2 years, all I've received is budget cuts over budget cuts. This company meant the world to me. I've dedicated my whole life to it, and now they want to throw me out like I'm a nobody, Jeffrey shouted, attracting long stares from a few people who were passing by. I think we should continue this in my office. I don't want half the company to hear what we're talking, I whispered and started walking in the opposite direction. I stopped in front of my office, waiting for Jeff to pick up the pace. I spent a moment staring at the wooden door, asking myself why I invited Jeffrey there to continue the conversation, since I had nothing in mind. My hand reached for my pocket, and I took out a bundle of keys. I unlocked the door and entered the room, followed by Jeffrey, who had been quietly walking behind me. I knew that Jeff was exactly the stereotype that does well in the corporate world. He had no family or close friends, no hobbies, and the only thing that made him feel something that resembles happiness was being successful within the corporation. While I, myself, was not too different, he seemed to take the stereotype to the extreme, and most of the people at the office were convinced he is psychopathic. We sat at my desk, stood in silence for a moment until an idea crossed my mind. Jeff, do you remember Alan Russell? We had a meeting where we had to decide whether he would stay in the company or not, I asked. Yeah, I remember Alan. But that was ages ago. What does this have to do with this? Alan was one of my closest friends, remember? I helped him get a job in the company. He was doing well until all those rats from the board voted to fire him. If I rightly recall, only I, you, and that other guy, Kurt, who left the company a few months ago, voted against his termination. Michael fired him and Alan took his life a few hours later. He was drowning in debt and had 2 damn kids to take care of all by himself, I explained, taken over by a self-induced state of anger. This is what they always do. I've got no wife or children, but my position here was all that meant something to me. I didn't fight for years to go all the way to the board of directors, just to get thrown out by some smartasses that would have made the same mistakes in my place. Honestly, they deserve to die. All of them do. He shouted, despite of all the signals I kept making with my hand in order to try and make him lower his voice. I struggled not to smile, as I knew the first step of my plan had worked. Jeff was so obsessed with disproving the rumor that he had no empathy that he always acted over the top when one was expected to show that particular feeling. Believe me, Jeffrey, I'd kill them all if I could do it, but things like this simply aren't possible. There has to be a way to get around this, I continued, seeing that I had activated something in his mind. Well, who are we to say what's possible and not? I think we can sort something out. You see, I always had some sort of contingency plan for a situation like this. He suddenly seemed more content than a few seconds before. Jeff went from being red-faced and screaming to unnaturally calm in a matter of seconds, which intrigued me. What's the contingency plan, if I'm not being too intrusive? Well, the solution may be unorthodox, to say the least, but it may get us what we want. Meet me at my place tonight, 9 p.m. We can talk in a more private manner. Look, I still have a few things to sort out in my office. I trust you'll be there. He suddenly concluded our conversation and left my office in a rush. What do you mean? Jeff! I responded, confused, but I was unable to make him turn back. I walked out of my office a few seconds later, but I couldn't see Jeffrey anywhere. I decided against searching for him and returned to my desk to finish my dreaded paperwork. Although I thought that finishing my work would keep my mind engaged, my thoughts were constantly flying back to Jeffrey's words every few seconds. I couldn't understand why he had concluded our conversation so sharply, and the way his behavior changed after announcing that he had a contingency plan left me with more questions than answers. The fact that Jeffrey asked me to meet him later in the day was also contributing to the confusion. It was safe to say that we generally cooperated well, but I was astonished by his willingness to share what seemed to be a highly secretive plan of his. After all, we had a good working relationship, and that was it, as the company environment wasn't exactly one where you could speak of friendship. I figured it could be very well something I could twist to my advantage, so I decided to see what he had to say. After a few more hours of attempting to concentrate on the documents in front of me, I finally reached the point where it was time for me to close my office and head home. I had no interest in working extra hours, so I put everything on my desk in order and left the room. I walked through a long corridor and took an elevator directly to the underground parking lot of the company headquarters. I drove straight home because it was still relatively early and resisted the temptation to head to Jeffrey's a few hours before I was supposed to. I drove through the city that was surprisingly empty for that time of the day, constantly thinking about what idea could have come through Jeff's mind. Jeffrey Robinson was one of the oldest employees of the company, and I was one of the few that could say that knew him fairly well, as there was not much to know about him after all. I eventually reached the suburbs and parked the car in front of the house I had lived in for almost 2 decades. I stepped inside a modern suburban house and stared at the surroundings for a few moments, as if I was absent from reality. Silence inside my home was overwhelming at first, but it was a reality I had become accustomed to after getting divorced. For unknown reasons, my mind started to fill with memories from my past that seemed to be much more colored than the bleak reality I was living. Although I tried to convince myself that I was finally able to cope with the separation, I knew deep inside that things were never the same after my wife found out about my shortcomings while I was away on business trips. The divorce also meant losing the custody of my son, who I only got to spend 4 years with. I rarely had the opportunity to see him after ending the relationship with his mother, and even so, only for a few hours every few weeks. Somehow, Jeffrey and I seemed quite alike, as after all, my position in the company was the only thing that kept me going. It was quite ironic because when I was younger, I would always make promises to myself that I would not let my career completely take over my life. It was already too late to stop the process because advancing through the ranks in the company was the only goal I was determined to follow no matter the cost, and the only thing that would add a tiny drop of color to an otherwise gray and numb existence. I entered my bedroom, threw my suitcase on the desk in the corner of the room, and got undressed. I picked some clothes that seemed more casual than the sober outfit I would usually wear. Since I still had some time to spend before meeting Jeffrey, I turned the television on. The background noise soothed my unrest, as the silence in the whole house was disturbing. I spent a good hour staring at the screen and trying in vain to become captivated by some obnoxious movie that I was watching. I eventually turned off the device because there was not much time left to burn and decided to leave a bit earlier. I headed towards the door, stepped outside, and walked directly to my car. I turned on the engine with a growing feeling of anxiety that started making itself felt in my whole body. I drove directly to Jeffrey's house, a place where I hadn't been many times before since he would keep mostly to himself. I parked my car on the side of the road and walked directly to his front door. I knocked loudly, and to my surprise, Jeffrey opened it within seconds. "Quite early, I must say," Jeffrey said, and made me a sign to walk inside. We went to his living room. Jeff took out a bottle of whiskey, poured some in 2 glasses, which he had placed on the table in front of his couch. "All right, now can you tell me what the grand plan is?" I asked once we were seated. "Well, did I ever tell you my father was an expert in chemistry? He even worked on some classified military projects back in the day," Jeffrey asked, taking no regard of my question. "No, but how is that relevant?" "I was serious about what I said in your office, Eric. You know, about using an unconventional solution to our problems. I hope you were too. Come, take a look at this," he replied, and got up from the couch. "Wait, where are you going? Aren't you going to finish your drink?" I asked as he was putting his glass back on the table. "We can finish it later, come on." I followed him through the house and into the basement, where I immediately noticed a gigantic table with many types of bottles and vials on it. I looked at the table full of containers of different sizes in confusion, while Jeffrey was pouring the liquid from many tiny vials into a large carafe with a red liquid in it. There were many scenarios that crossed my mind after Jeff's breakdown in my office, but I never imagined he would go such lengths in order to accomplish what he had in mind, he said, and handed me a few full vials. "It doesn't have any smell, it's like water, but why are you showing me this?" I replied with growing confusion. "My father taught me a few things. If enough of this substance is poured into someone's drink, just 1 sip can kill an adult in around a minute or 2. It has no smell nor a taste. It's hard to make and the ingredients are hard to come by, but once done, it's perfect," he spoke with growing enthusiasm. "What the hell are you trying to do, Jeff? I'm not gonna get dragged into this," I shouted, realizing what Jeffrey had insinuated. I almost started rushing back to the house and strongly considered leaving, but something kept me back in there. I kept thinking that if Jeff had indeed a perfect plan, maybe I could convince him to share the spoils of victory once it is put in motion. Let me explain a few technical details first. You may change your mind. The board hasn't decided on what the leadership of the company is going to organize for the 4th of July. That's in 1 week, so they're going to need ideas, and fast. What does that have to do? Let me finish. All you have to do is convince them to rent a cabin in the mountains and have a party of some sort. I'll be doing what has to be done, and you'll just have to organize the gathering. I'll keep an unpoisoned bottle, and I'll fill your glass from that one. As for me, I'll just pour myself whatever I'm pouring the rest. I've made my choice," he explained with an almost fanatical conviction. "What if this gets linked to me? I would be the only one that didn't die apart from you. Besides, why can't you organize it yourself?" I protested. "I told you. You're not getting dragged into this. It will be as if you were never there. No one will be able to prove that you participated because they have no one left to interrogate. I don't plan on leaving that place. Both me and the others will be dead when this all ends. You know, you can trust me," he said, becoming more and more convincing. "Can I?" Although I firmly believed that Jeffrey's plan was maniacal, the part of my mind that saw the immense opportunity in his proposition instantly took over my conscience. His idea meant eliminating all the department chiefs, along with most of the people that could ascend into the leadership after a tragic event. Provided that I had a good chance to get away with my complicity with Jeffrey, the pressure to accept started growing inside of me. If everything were to go according to the plan, I'd most likely be the favorite candidate, not for a better department, but even for the position of CEO. Eric, we've been friends for almost 15 years now. You know how much this position meant to me. I have nothing to gain by betraying you. Jeff resumed talking after a few moments of desolate silence. I just want to end everything on my own terms. I didn't exactly agree on the friendship part, and I was certain that Jeff used the word only to gain some sympathy, but decided to let it slide and focus on the plan itself. But are you sure is this going to work? What if they just don't agree to host this event? Will you even be able to be there if they terminate you? They will. You know it's a tradition to host a 4th of July event every year, and they can't just break this unwritten rule. I trust you'll make it work. If Mike wants to kick me out of this company, the procedures will still take around 2 weeks at least. 4th of July is in what, 7 days? We can do this. We spent most of the night discussing the plan to the slightest detail. Jeffrey explained about how the two of us would have to be at the cabin earlier than the rest in order to finish the last touches to our plan. We agreed to offer to the board that we go to the event place sooner to check that everything is in order. Although I was deeply concerned and anxious about the ways that could have went wrong, the satisfaction of knowing that there was a chance of successfully removing all of my competition from one blow inside the company dominated over the doubts. I headed back home close to morning and went directly to bed without bothering to strip myself off the clothes I was wearing. Somehow, I was able to fade away to sleep without second-guessing the decision I'd made. Next morning, I woke up early and could barely get up from my bed because of the tiredness, but remembering that I had the urgent task of preparing an event for the company, I found the strength to get up. I immediately opened my computer and started searching for the perfect location for the event that I would have to plan. Most locations were either already booked or in places where a stealthy plan like ours would have had no chance of success. Just when I was about to give up and get prepared for work, I stumbled over something that caught my attention. A small and poorly made advertisement took me to a page that showed a fairly large cabin in the mountains, not very far away from the city, yet in an isolated area. I immediately took the phone number from the internet page and called. An elderly woman answered, and I soon had all the details I needed to present in front of the board. The place was quite a few miles away from any inhabited place, and it was perfect for what we wanted to do. I got dressed quickly and headed directly to work. During the next hours, I diligently followed the instructions I had received from Jeff. Being the only one with a detailed plan for the event, I quickly managed to get the whole board to agree on my proposal for the approaching 4th of July. It was such a relief for most of the board that someone had volunteered to take the pain in the ass of event organizing that I received more shallow compliments than in my entire career combined. We spent most of the day disregarding our work and timetables and used the time to plan the yearly event in detail. Jeffrey also participated in the discussion and diligently agreed to everything that I said about the future event. His calmness seemed natural, but one could see in the gaze in his eyes that he was determined to go through with the plan. One more thing, I assume someone has to go there early and check that everything's in order, Michael asked after we finally established all the details. I can handle that. Jeffrey can tag along as well, but I'm sure that everything will go as planned. An extra check before everyone comes should still be done though, I proposed, immediately receiving approval. During the following week, time seemed to have stopped in place, and every day I would find myself counting hours until I would have to go to sleep and put an end to another day. I didn't speak much to Jeffrey after the day when the plans were made, but the deep, long stare followed by a grin I would receive every time I walked past him at the office was the confirmation that the plan was still going to be put in motion. Eventually, the time came for me and Jeffrey to leave and start carrying out our plan. We met early in the morning and the day we would all have to go to the cabin. Each one of us took their own car in order for me to be able to get as far away from that place in as little time as possible after the plan would be carried out. There was still several hours until the other members of the company's leadership were supposed to leave, so the time allowed us to prepare every detail. The roads were quite empty and we allowed ourselves to drive as fast as we could, reaching the cabin in record time. Jeffrey greeted the lady I had arranged the details with upon arrival and made sure that she would be far away for at least the following 24 hours while I was still waiting in my car in order to not be seen by anyone that could link the event to me. We did a quick check of the building and phoned Michael to let him know everything was in order. I followed Jeffrey to the dining room to prepare the drinks that would be served to everyone at the first meal that would be eaten at the location. "Look, let's test it first," Jeff said, and poured some of the transparent poison inside a whiskey bottle he had taken from a cabinet. "See? No smell? We're good," he added, and put the bottle back where he had taken it from. Jeffrey went through with his part and poisoned all but one of the wine bottles that we were supposed to drink at dinner. The properties of the substance were amazing. It could have been poured in any drink and no one had the slightest chance to realize its presence. It was terrifying to realize that I had been working for more than a decade right by the side of someone who was able to carry out such an ordeal. However, I was well aware what was at stake and how much it could potentially gain. "See the one with the tiny mark on the label? That's the one I'll pour you the wine from, so you can still drink and not look suspicious. Got it?" he explained, and I nodded approvingly in response. We waited for a few more hours, barely saying anything to each other, until the other members of the company's board started to arrive. Soon enough, everyone was there, and to my and Jeffrey's satisfaction, no one was absent. After spending a few hours touring the area, it started getting dark and the fresh air made the corporate drones hungry. It was time for dinner, and we all took a seat at a gigantic table in the middle of the largest room in the cabin. The atmosphere was quite relaxed and festive. Even the members of the board who were known to be grumpy seemed to enjoy the event and crack a smile every now and then. "It's a shame we didn't hire a few people to serve. It would have been easier," Michael commented. "I'll do the honors then." Jeffrey suddenly intervened and hurried to the kitchen in order to bring the bottles. He returned a few moments later with multiple bottles of wine and started filling everyone's glasses. When it was time to pour my drink, he pretended that the bottle was empty, although he had barely opened it, and brought another. While filling my glass, he oriented the bottle in a way that I could see the tiny mark on the label. Suddenly, right after my glass had been filled, I could hear a loud noise of glass shattering. Jeffrey intentionally dropped the unpoisoned bottle so he would have an excuse to bring another one. After that, he filled his own glass using a different one. He finished filling the glasses a few moments later and quickly brought the rest of the empty bottles back to the kitchen. "We'll clean up the mess later, but first, let's raise a toast," I spoke as soon as Jeffrey was back. "To all we've accomplished so far, and to all achievements that may come," I exclaimed loudly, got up from my chair, and raised my glass. Everyone in the room did exactly the same with an almost perfect timing. Each and every one of us took a generous sip of the red wine before taking a seat again and putting the glasses back on the table. "All right, I think this is a good opportunity to start talking about— oh, God, my head." Michael started speaking, but fell with his head on the table in a matter of seconds. I started looking at the other people from the dining room, panicked, and in the range of 5 seconds, all of the people but me and Jeff had fallen just like Michael did. "Jeff, now what?" I shouted insecurely and slowly got up from the table. I received no answer, and Jeffrey kept staring at me from his place at the table. I took a few steps in his direction until I started having a strange sensation in my head and stomach. As I got closer to him, Jeffrey got up from his chair, continuing to stare at me silently. "Jeff, what's happening? I have a strange feeling," I said, feeling an increasingly stronger ache in my head. "Eric, I'm sorry, but you're just like the rest of them. You said Alan was your friend. Wouldn't it be a pity if I were to remember that you were one of the first who voted for him to be kicked out? You just took advantage of the fact that he killed himself the next day so you can turn the story into your advantage. I may not be that smart, but I do remember that Alan didn't mean anything to you." Jeffrey spoke on an unnaturally calm tone. "What the hell did you do, Jeffrey? What's wrong with you?" I screamed as the pain was becoming harder and harder to ignore. "I poured just enough in your bottle to make sure you have some time left before you go. As for me, I left one of the unmarked bottles unpoisoned. Did you think I would just give you a one-way ticket to the top? You're just a traitor and a sycophant who would have never sided with me. All you ever wanted was to suck up to Michael so you can climb up the ranks," he continued, while I could barely maintain my balance. A toast to all we've accomplished and the achievements that may come, Jeffrey mocked me, burst into hysterical laughter, opened a cabinet, and took out a whiskey bottle. In the next second, I fell on my knees. The excruciating pain was clearly the sign that there was nothing I could do to save myself, and that the end was close. I continued staring at Jeffrey, who took a large swig from the whiskey bottle and threw it to the ground, shattering it. It was at that moment that I realized that I had seen that bottle and the cabinet it was taken from before, and, despite feeling my insides burn, I burst into laughter. I've actually gave the situation a little more thought. You know what was the conclusion? I'm gonna get out of here. With a little bit of luck, I'll be far away before anyone finds this mess. He spoke again, although my violent laughter covered his voice completely. What? Now you find it ironic that you end like this? He asked, barely holding his laughter himself. Jeff, you idiot! The bottle you drank from, I said, making more and more effort to say each word, and started coughing violently. What? What about it? He asked defiantly, with a broad smile on his face. It's the one you tested the first batch on, I screamed and continued laughing and coughing my lungs out, although I was slowly fading away. I could only see Jeffrey's facial expression turn from ecstasy to agony before he collapsed to the floor a few seconds later, as if life had left his body in a fraction of a second. I continued laughing hysterically as a last display of defiance before my sight was completely blacked out. My face hitting the floor violently was the last thing I could feel before my consciousness slowly drifted away into numbness.